What's up, guys? Welcome to the Listen In with Lily Invest podcast. Today, I'm very excited to interview special guest Tony J. Robinson. Tony is an experienced real estate investor and entrepreneur with a focus on Airbnb rentals. He built a portfolio of properties worth over $12 million in just 3 years, making him an absolute expert in the industry. In today's episode, Tony will be sharing his insights on the current state of Airbnb and answering the question that is on many investors' minds: is Airbnb over? There's a lot of talk about an upcoming AirBnB Apocalypse and what that means going forward. Will Airbnb still be a great asset class to invest in the future? And with Tony's wide range of experience and knowledge, I'm excited to hear what he has to say, and I hope you guys are too. So without further ado, let's welcome Tony J. Robinson to the show. Let's start with the state of Airbnb right now. So I have heard that the Airbnb apocalypse is coming, cities are shutting it down. It doesn't work anymore. It's panic and fire everywhere. What's going on?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of the sky is falling, Airbnbs are over as an asset class and you're never going to make money again. And I think a lot of that, there's a hint of truth to that, but I think a lot of that is market dependent. I think a lot of that is host dependent and kind of how you're doing it. What we saw, Lily, was that over the last couple of years, the Airbnb space was kind of like the gold rush, where there were so many investors who saw these outsized returns for relatively minimal work. Right? You could just literally buy something turnkey and you're cash on like crazy on day one. And what that did is it brought a lot of people into this space who honestly probably had no business owning and running an Airbnb to begin with. Because being an Airbnb host and being in the short-term rental space, even though it's still real estate, it's a significantly different way of managing as opposed to a long-term rental. And a lot of these folks who understood long-term rentals or flipping or wholesaling or all of these other asset classes, they didn't change their mindset as they came into the Airbnb space. So I think a lot of what we're seeing when it comes to folks losing money, and I've seen that, right? A lot of folks losing money on their Airbnbs, it's because they aren't approaching it as a business. They aren't approaching it as a hospitality first, customer service driven business. And there were so many properties, like if you looked on Airbnb, just ugly houses, just ugly ass houses. And it's like, how are people putting that out, as a place for folks to rent? But there was so much pent up demand from COVID in 2021 and 2022, and the supply levels, the number of available listings was still kind of creeping back up. So there was, you could kind of get by just by, doing the minimum effort. But I think what we're seeing now is that as we get into a more mature and stabilized Airbnb market, that it's the hosts that are really investing in experience. It's the hosts that are really investing in design. It's the hosts that are really investing in customer service that are going to be the ones that continue to be profitable. I will say that we're probably going to be slightly down across our portfolio because 2021 was such a banner year in so many ways. And we're still up, data speaking above 2019, as an Airbnb market, but 2021 was just such an anomaly. And I think so many people kind of set that as a benchmark when really that shouldn't have been. So what we're focusing on now is how do we stabilize our portfolio? How do we protect our profits and how do we just become better as hosts?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense because, I have two properties as short-term / midterm rentals. And really those are kind of just stumbling into it. Like you said, I wasn't setting out to be an Airbnb host or Airbnb operator. I just happen to have this detached garage apartment that it's okay, yeah, it'll be relatively cheap to furnish this thing. Let's put it up on Airbnb. And it's yeah, there's a completely different job. Right. My long-term rentals is kind of call me if something breaks, but otherwise I don't hear from you. You pay your rent, it's cool. And then Airbnb is a completely different beast. So it's a good point. When it's hot, it's hot. But if you don't know what you're doing, it can be tough. How did you get into Airbnb? How did you arrive? Where's your portfolio now? And how did you arrive there? What's that backstory?
Yeah, so we got started. I got my first real estate deal back in October of 2019, and it was a long-term rental. And I live in Southern California, right outside of Los Angeles, and I was investing long distance in Louisiana. So I was in one of the It's like the third biggest city in Louisiana, which no one's probably ever heard of, Shreveport, Louisiana. But I got some really good lending opportunities out there. So I was able to knock out a couple of deals with very little capital. And that's how I kind of cut my teeth. But at the time, I knew that I wanted to scale into an asset class that had more cash flow because my goal was to replace my income. And at the time, I had a healthy 6-figure salary and like doing the math on these regular single family long-term rentals that are making a couple $100 a month. I was like, I'm gonna need a lot of these to replace my income. So my goal was just to get in, kind of learn the basics and foundations of real estate investing, and then kind of graduate into another asset class that produce more cash flow. And I had a buddy who, we had been kind of chatting, and he said, "Hey, Tony, I just bought this cabin in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee." And I was like, "Where the heck is that at?" You kind of heard of it, but you don't really know where it's at. And anyway, he's like, "Hey, if you really want some good cash flow, you should come check this out." So I was one of those people who heard of the returns and kind of chase that return. So we ended up buying our first short-term rental. It was a cabin in Tennessee in summer of 2020. So we closed in August of 2020, which is a really good time to kind of get into it, because had we purchased a few months before, in like January, we would have gotten hit super hard in, March, when everything kind of went crazy and a lot of folks just had to kind of shut down for, 1, 2, 3 months. But August was kind of when people were getting comfortable with the idea of COVID, and things had kind of loosened up a little bit. So anyway, we bought our first one in that summer of 2020, and it was by far, Lily, the best deal that we've ever bought. It was a 5-bedroom cabin in Tennessee. Our total all-in cost, down payment, closing costs, like little furnishings, was about $65K. And that first year we netted, I think, $84,000. So it was 138% cash on cash return on that first deal. So that'll work, right? And that's what's got us, that deal is what got us hooked. And now we're up to we got about 30 properties. Not all of those are active. We're still kind of getting some of those set up or rehabbed. But yeah, we're at about 30 properties right now.
That's super cool. When I think about like your Airbnb process and portfolio, it's really different than what I think someone like myself has considered, where I'm in a residential area, just like in a normal town, and I'm thinking, okay, I have these properties I can go after, and I'm thinking, should I put them on Airbnb just for like the normal traveler who happens to come to my city and wants to choose Airbnb over a hotel option, or maybe like a traveling nurse or something like that? Whereas it seems like you're much more focused on not just like a typical residential market where people might travel to for work or to visit family, but instead on like these vacation destinations like the Smoky Mountains and some of the other places you've been. Is that intentional? Do you think the returns and the Airbnb regulations specifically, like, is there a real difference between those types of Airbnb investing?
It's a great point, Lily, and a great question. And there's two schools of thought around this. I guess maybe a few, but I know some investors who say, I will only buy an Airbnb if I can also rent it out as a long-term rental. Like, that's the only way that I'll buy it. I come from the other perspective where every asset that I buy, I'm buying for a specific purpose. And you would probably never hear the CEO of Hilton or Marriott say, hey, we're only going to buy this hotel if we can also rent it as an apartment complex if things go south, right? Like that's not how they run their business. They are a hospitality brand, and that's what they focus on. So as we've kind of built our Airbnb portfolio, I've approached it with that same mindset, that we want to focus on assets that are true vacation assets and in cities that are true vacation destinations. And it's for a few reasons. First is regulation. I get very nervous at the idea of buying in urban or suburban settings where there's a high density of primary residences and there's a high density of different types of industry. Like, you've got business headquarters, universities, like I'm near LA, right? LA has every kind of industry you can think of. So when you think about if LA turned off Airbnbs, if LA said no more Airbnbs, like, are they really economically impacted by that decision? Not at all. So what true incentive do they have to do that? And think about all of the people that have their primary residences in LA, even though that there's millions and millions of people that visit LA on a regular basis, like buying an Airbnb in that city to me is difficult. So we look for cities that are economically dependent on the revenue that short-term rentals generate. And typically you find that by going into markets that are true vacation destinations.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Like I said, I have two garage apartments that I have up. Sometimes on Airbnb, sometimes like I have right now a traveling nurse who's going to be in town for the next 3 months. So she's renting on that basis. And I like that as kind of like a midterm model.
Right.
But to your point about regulations, in my town, you have to get a short-term rental license, and it's like $30 a year. It's nothing crazy, but there's a cap on the number of licenses that they'll give out at a given time. And so they actually just like stopped giving out licenses for like the next 6 months, and then they'll reevaluate. So I'm good now to keep running my short-term rentals because I have a current license. But if that was my acquisition strategy, that just got cut off, in an instant. So going into, like you said, markets that are dependent on Airbnb revenue, they have much more incentive than just like, yeah, we have everything. They don't necessarily need Airbnb.
We don't need it. But that brings up a really good point, Lily, because I'm actually not afraid of regulation, right? Like I'm not looking for cities that have no regulation or that are just like the wild, wild west, because I think there are some risks with that as well, right? Like if it's a city that like let me give you an example. So there's a city of Ithaca, New York. They had some super loose Airbnb regulations to begin with, and there were 100, maybe 1,000 listings in that city. And Ithaca, New York, there's a college there. There's a high population of primary residences, and you started to hear complaints from the folks that lived in that city. So the city council gets together and they said, okay, we're gonna pass sweeping Airbnb regulation. And what they said was that if you owned a property in Ithaca's on a lake, if you own a property that's lakefront, you can only rent your property out for like 240 nights out of the year. So you went from 365 to 240. So you lost almost a third of the year. If you were not lakefront, they only allowed you to rent your property out for 29 nights out of the year. So can you imagine if you owned a property that was renting 365 and now you get 29 days? It's not profitable. You can't do it. So I don't necessarily look for places that have no regulation. I actually do like places that have some level of regulation because it gives me certainty as I step into that market about what to expect. And I actually really do love the idea of a cap, because we have 3 properties in the city that have a short-term rental cap as well. And the reason I love it is because it puts a cap, it puts a limit on supply. And as demand continues to increase, which we're seeing that in a lot of markets, if demand increases but supply holds steady, now I can charge more for that listing than I could have, a year ago, because that's how the law of economics works. So I actually do like the idea of cities having caps. Yeah.
And like you said, going into that market and knowing what the regulations are versus being there and hoping they don't take it down from 365 to 29.
Right.
Makes sense. So to kind of take it from the perspective of maybe those who are looking at the short-term rental space, maybe even specifically like vacation short-term rentals as a way to get started in real estate over something like wholesaling or flipping or whatnot, how do you see people making that determination? Like what things should they be considering?
Like if they actually want to become Airbnb hosts?
Well, if they want to become real estate investors, right? Kind of like the situation you were in, and it's like the high cash flow led you towards the short-term rental space. I'm assuming more than just like your love for being a hospitality host,
right?
But if you're like, okay, I want real estate, but like, is this asset class specifically a good place to start, or how would I know?
Every asset class, every type of real estate investing, I think it aligns with a certain type of personality. If you hate the idea of constantly interacting with the general public, you probably shouldn't become an Airbnb host, because that is literally what you're going to do, right? Our average stay duration for our properties in Joshua Tree is like 1.7 days. So that means every other day we have a new group of people checking into our property. Sometimes it's as small as 2 people, sometimes it's 4. Our bigger properties can sleep up to 16 people. So there are dozens, hundreds of people that come through all of our properties on a monthly basis. And every single one of those people has a different temperament, have different expectations, have a different communication style. Sometimes the guests in check-in will never hear from them, right? They'll check in, they won't reply to a single message. They'll check out, they'll leave a 5-star review, and everything's great. Other times we'll have a guest that sends us 10 messages before they even check in. So you get both ends of that spectrum. So I think as you kind of evaluate which asset class makes the most sense for you as a new investor, it's like, okay, what are the skills? What are the abilities? What are the temperaments that this type of real estate investing needs? And how do I align with that? Like someone who's a wholesaler, that's a very different skill set than someone who's a buy and hold long-term rental person. Because when you're wholesaling, typically you got to be somewhat a decent of a salesperson, right? You got to be able to communicate with people. You got to do really well with rejection. You got to be able to pound the phones, knock on doors, text, whatever it is. And you're just always on kind of talking to people. I couldn't do that, right? I'm an introvert, and just like that high level of like, like boom, boom all the time, I couldn't do it, right? But if you're someone that's really good at project management, then maybe flipping is something that makes more sense for you. So I think every asset class kind of has the skills and abilities, and it's just kind of doing that self-check to say, where can I align the most? And the reason we landed on short-term rentals was because my wife, Sarah, she's really good at the guest side. And I was really good at finding the deals and the software and the analysis and all those other things. So when you kind of put it together, we made a really good team.
Right. No, that makes total sense. It's like, it's the same thing I think about with my rentals, where I like doing the analyzing, and I like finding the deals and negotiating and that type of thing. But once we've got it, I kind of actually don't want to be that involved with it. And so, I luckily have my brother who likes the property management side of it more. He's more of a people person than I am. And so that kind of works.
Isn't it funny that we're both like, content creators, YouTubers, but we're like introverted? Yeah, it's this weird thing, right?
It's so funny. Like the times when I go live, or like I meet somebody in person, and I know you have an upcoming in-person event coming up, so I want to hear how you're prepping for that as an introvert. But I'm always like, I think people expect me to be way more social than I actually am. Like, you have to realize, like, it's just me in this room and a camera. Like,
I say that all the time. Right? Like, it's just me in my spare bedroom talking into this lens, and like I never see who's on the other side. So it's this really weird dynamic that we have.
It is. And then you remember, like, oh yeah, there's this relationship that comes through the screen, and it is nice to I like to go live and do Zooms and kind of interact in that way, but it's nice to have that interaction sometimes, but with your personality and, with mine as well, it's just like, okay, back to the
definitely.
So is Sarah going to be leading off the in-person event you guys have? Are you going to turn on your extrovert side? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, it's well, first, just the event that we're talking about is the STR Summit. So every quarter, my wife Sarah and I host an in-person event. In January, we were in Florida. This April 10th, we'll be in Austin, Texas. So we're super excited for that event. And it is just 2.5 days of all things short-term rental. And we bring in different speakers to talk about pretty much all facets of real estate investing as it relates to Airbnb. So we have someone talking about raising private capital and like, how do you fund all of your deals without any of your own money? We have someone talking about off-market deal flow. Like, how do you find really good off-market deals? Someone talking about rental arbitrage, because that's one part of real estate or Airbnb investing that is like unique. We talk about how to analyze deals, how to price deals. So really we give people like the framework that they need to go from, I know nothing about Airbnbs, to, okay, I've got the good framework. And even if you're someone that has a few deals, you're still going to pull away with something, because we go into some more advanced topics as well. So actually, for all of your listeners, Lily, if they go to strsummit.com and they use the coupon code Lily, so LILI, they'll get 10% off. So anyway, to answer your question, the event itself, like it's this really weird dynamic, because I'm 100% an introvert, but when I hear all these stories from people about, man, Tony, I've been watching your YouTube channel and I did XYZ, or I made this thing happen after, like, look, I literally just got a message today, and I'm going to read what this message says, because like, those are the kind of things that give me energy. Someone messaged me. He said, bro, y'all helped me change my life. Went to your STR Summit in Orlando, and the day after I started my co-hosting business, and I'm currently going to be at 7 houses, and I have my own STR. Thank you for your inspiration and knowledge. So like, when I hear things like that, and in person, it's just over and over and over again, like, it energizes you and it reminds you of why you're doing this all in the first place. So I feel super dead afterwards. Like, me and Sarah don't talk to each other for like a few days afterwards just to recover. But in the moment, it's so cool to hear those stories.
Yeah, I love that. And I encourage people to go check it out. And just like, because it's not an asset class that I have explored personally, but it's one that I'm very interested in. And for a lot of the reasons that you've talked about, with like being very intentional with like the use case for the properties you're purchasing, for the cash flow, that type of thing. So yeah, definitely check it out. We'll make sure everybody has access to the link and things like that. Can we go through, like, whether it's that first deal or another deal, can we go start to finish through what it looks like to invest in a short-term rental? maybe even just starting with like, how do you get leads? Are you buying off the MLS? Do you talk to a broker? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I'll talk about one of our other properties because that first one I think was a bit of an anomaly. But like some more recent deals we've picked up, a lot of our deals come from relationships. So we've built relationships with realtors, we've built relationships with builders, we've built relationships with wholesalers, and a lot of those relationships are what lead to most of our deals. So for example, we have, I think 15 tiny homes in Joshua Tree right now, and all 15 of those properties came from one person. The first property was just listed on the MLS. We met with the realtor who was also the builder. So he was a builder and then he listed his own property. And we told him like, hey, we love your house. If you have any more new builds, we'd love to buy them for you. And he's like, you know what? As a matter of fact, I've got quite a few lots where I'm building out more of these. And over the course of a few years, we end up buying 15 of these properties from this guy, and he never listed them. They never went on the MLS. Like it was just, he'd call us up or shoot us a text and say, hey, I've got 3 more. I'm like, cool, we'll take them. Hey, I've got 2 more. Cool, we'll take them. And that process just kind of repeated itself. So that's how we found a lot of our deals is through the relationship aspect.
And so he was building those on empty lots and then you were buying them off him once they were done.
Yeah.
Got it. I love that. And how do you finance something like that? And I know a little bit, we've talked about the different ways we're financing our individual portfolios. And something that's like keeping me up at night right now is like the BRRRR being so dependent on like that cash out refinance at the end.
Right.
And that's how I've done all of my deals, right? I've been able to keep equity by borrowing private capital for purchases and renovations, using a little bit of my own capital, but then returning it all through a cash out refinance at the end. And with just lending guidelines, interest rates, that is becoming harder to do, right? It's harder to make the numbers pencil out on that back end. So are you running into any similar types of problems, or how are you funding the purchase of the deal so that you can get into like a stabilized situation with your cash flow?
Yeah. First thing I'll say, Lily, is that we've definitely slowed down on acquisitions in, like the last 4 or 5 months. We started 2022 just like hot. We were buying like 2 houses a month in 2022, and some of those were flips, some of those were things we kept for ourselves, but like it was just nonstop, for most of 2022. And now we've only purchased 1 property so far this year, which is kind of light for us in comparison to last year. So yeah, it definitely is harder to find good deals and pencil out. So I just want to say that so everyone's kind of not feeling like they're doing something wrong. It's just, that's the state of the game right now. But in terms of how we finance it, so we've done a few different models, right? If we are buying a fixer-upper, right, like a property that needs to be rehabbed, we pretty much always raise private capital to fund the purchase and the rehab. And we'll use that money. We'll get the property, from ugly to a really nice Airbnb, and then either we'll list it and we'll just sell it to some third party, or we have a pool of investors that want to work with us long term. And essentially, our flipping LLC will sell that entity or sell that property to a partner, and then that partner gets the debt. So it's just a regular purchase for them, but it's kind of like a refi for us. They go out, they get the debt, and then we partner on that deal long term. So that's how we did the majority of our properties was we'd find it and then we'd partner up with someone else to get the debt for us, and we just work together long term to manage it.
So to dig into that a little bit, let's say that what's like a good number for where you might be at, where you need to do the sell, which is kind of like a pseudo refinance to that partner.
Yeah, I mean, it varies by the deal. Like we have a deal right now where we're probably going to clear maybe, I don't know, 30, 40K on it. We have other deals where it's, over 6 figures depending on the deal. Right. I think for us, it's not always how much money we make on the front end, but it's just like, can we get enough to purchase the property, rehab it, and then still have enough equity to sell it to someone, and we're not like underwater on a deal.
Right.
We actually do have 1 flip right now, and our plan was never to keep it. It was a flip we were going to sell, but we're going to end up having to write a check on that one because the market shifted on us. We went over budget on that deal, so we have the ARV coming down where our costs kind of went up. So we're in a pickle on that one. But that's part of real estate investing. You can't win them all.
Right. So when you sell to that partner and they get that kind of, that's a long-term debt that they're
Yep.
purchasing with. And then does the partnership look like one party's managing it? Here's how we're splitting cash flow, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. So typically when we partner with folks, we pretty much do everything. They are responsible for providing the capital. And if there's any major decisions on the property, we'll typically consult them, right? Like if, this hasn't happened, but like, I don't know, if we need to like replace the roof, we would have a conversation with the partner. Or actually more recently, we ended up adding a game room to one of our properties. That was the conversation we had with that partner. But outside of those major decisions, our team does everything else. So we source the deal, we set the property up, which is a lot of work, and we manage it ongoing. And yeah, from there, we just split equity and we split the profits. And we've used a bunch of different structures. Sometimes it's a smaller equity piece for us, but we get a management fee. Other times it's just straight down the middle, 50-50. So we've played around with different models depending on the deal and kind of what makes the most sense.
Right. Yeah, that's super cool. What else should we know about Airbnb? I didn't even know exactly what questions to ask. It's a different world than what I live in most times.
I think that most people, there's so many gurus out there and people on social media that, hype up Airbnbs as a great asset class, and it is, but it's also hard, right? And people have to understand that especially with our model, the majority of people coming to your property are on vacation. And the amount of money that people spend on vacation is tied to their discretionary income. So as you see these kind of peaks and valleys in the economy, right? And obviously right now we're trending towards this valley, the amount of discretionary spending that people has starts to decrease. Now, I've looked at the data and people still, even during a recession, even during 2008, people were still going on vacation. But what you saw was that the number of people going on vacation decreased and the amount of money that people were spending on vacation decreased. So because we are tied to more leisure activities, we do we are more impacted by the economy, where something like self-storage or a mobile home park, those have a little bit more recession resistance. But obviously the cash flow is a little bit lower. So I think that people have to understand that there are ups and downs in this game, probably a little bit more than other properties or property types. But, if you're in it for the long haul, you got to roll with those punches.
There we go. All right. Sorry about that. We'll cut that little part out. Yeah, that makes sense. One question that I've been asking everybody who's come on the show and shared their journey is like, if you had to start over and do one thing differently, especially for someone who kind of got into what could be a tricky asset class around the time of COVID and stuff, like, is there one thing that you would do differently in your journey?
One thing I don't know if I would change anything, but I also don't want to like cop out and not say anything. I think, I don't know. What would I do differently? Like there's so many things that we've done that we're like, okay, will we do it the same way? Like, for example, we have a heavy concentration of our properties in split between two markets, right? We have 30 properties and we're only in two markets right now. So I know a lot of my friends, they'll have one here, two there, a couple over there. And there's pluses and minuses to both. We were able to go into, especially in Joshua Tree, and really establish a strong infrastructure. So we started our own cleaning company out there because we had so many properties and we couldn't find good cleaners. So we literally just we put up ads and just built a company to clean our own properties. And that gives us a very high level of control over the cleaning process, which is fantastic. There's these, efficiencies of scale that come with going deep into one market, but there's also more risk, right? Because if you're, 50% or 70% in one market, as that market kind of fluctuates, like that's a big chunk of your portfolio. And, obviously Joshua Tree has seen an immense amount of competition, and we've had to reinvest into quite a few of our properties to be able to compete with that still. So I don't know if I would change that, but I can say that as we look to continue to scale, we're moving away from some of the more mature markets. And Joshua Tree is still a great market, right? If you're looking for good appreciation, if you're looking for, like you want to do cost segregation, like the properties out there, you can get a nice big property out there. even the cash flow, right? Like you can still get good cash flow in that market, or at least top line revenue. But what we're looking to do moving forward is probably buying more properties that generate less top line revenue, but the cash on cash return is a little bit higher. So we're looking in some of these more secondary and tertiary markets that maybe aren't known nationally, but like if you go to that pocket of the country, everyone knows about it. So like, for example, we have a campground under contract right now in West Virginia, and I'd never been there before, but it was a good deal. And we want to test out that model of buying in some of these smaller markets.
That's super cool. Super exciting. And I know people can follow along with your journey on social media and such. Can you just let everybody know where to find you? And if, again, they want to come out to the short-term rental summit, how they can do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So if y'all want to come hang out with us in Texas, head over to strsummit.com. Again, use the coupon code Lili, Lili. You'll get 10% off of that. But if you want to hang out with me anywhere else, I'm the co-host of the Bigger Pockets Real Estate Rookie podcast. So I think I can say that we're the second biggest real estate podcast in the country. And then my wife and I run the Real Estate Robinson's YouTube channel, where we talk pretty much all things Airbnb. And then on Instagram, it's at Tony J. Robinson.
Awesome. Always a pleasure talking with you, Tony. I appreciate you, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Lily. I hope the listeners got some good value from this, and looking forward to chatting again.
Absolutely. Everybody go check Tony out. He's a good one. He's a good one for real. That is today's episode of the Listen In with Lili Invest podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed it and were able to pick up a few new things about the world of short-term rentals and Airbnb. A big thank you to Tony J. Robinson for sharing his insights. Make sure you guys go follow him on Instagram or here on YouTube. Both of his socials will be linked in the description below. And until next time, check out this episode right here.